My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
If there's one thing that my family and friends know me for, it's being an amazing gift giver. I owe it all to Celebrations Passport from 1-800-Flowers.com, my one-stop shopping site that has amazing gifts for every occasion. With Celebrations Passport, I get free shipping on thousands of amazing gifts. And the more gifts I give, the more perks and rewards I earn. To learn more and take your gift giving to the next level, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
Right, Mark, welcome to this. It is the Eggonomics podcast, the podcast all about rugby and business. I'm JB, and I'll be joined by Mark Evans shortly. But before I do that, if you enjoy this podcast, if you enjoy EggChasers, which I assume you do because you're on our feed, why don't you go over to YouTube and follow Tim Cocker and his YouTube channel, which going from strength to strength. Tim is literally all over the globe, if all over the globe being South Africa, on a regular basis, talking about rugby, doing all those great things that Tim does. If you like all the stuff that we put out on the podcast, you're going to love the YouTube channel, so do that. And of course, one other note, this podcast is brought to you by Beardmore & Co. Independent Financial Advisors. Yes, that is me. And if you like pensions, financial planning, investments, all that good stuff, if you need it, you know someone else that needs it, please follow me on LinkedIn or just look us up on the internet and give us a call. Anyway, enough of that, because I'm going to be joined by Mark Evans. If you are new to this particular segment of EggChasers, this is my monthly check-in with the business guru himself. Mark was formerly of Saracens and Harlequins and is now in charge of Fiji Drua, as well as having a huge and extensive knowledge of sports business. So, let's get into it. Mark, how are you?
Well, I'm good. Only a week to go back to Fiji. Well, a bit less than a week now, isn't it? No, 6 days. On a plane on Tuesday. And, yeah, looking forward to it.
Are you all prepared?
Well, I mean, I've been working, obviously, you know, I took a week off, but I've been working sort of late nights, Fiji time and stuff, and early mornings. So it's not as good as when you're there, but, you know, it's I don't feel like I'm sort of going back into something I don't know what's going on. I think we're on top of stuff, I think, generally. There's a little bit going on, but there's always a little bit going on in Fiji. It's sort of come to the territory, really.
Well, something very unfortunate happened this weekend, Mark, and I didn't much enjoy it. I was drinking in Cornwall with a few friends of mine.
There's no surprise there.
Yeah, avid friends of the podcast and listeners, and they've started doing impressions of you telling me no and that I'm wrong continuously. So I had to endure this all weekend. Something like, no, JB, this is the reason that you're wrong, over and over again. So I've got a horrible feeling this might become a thing.
I'm sorry. I'll try and stop doing that.
Right.
I'm not promising, mind. I'll try.
Try your hardest, because I've got a feeling that you're going to think I'm wrong on many things.
Yes, it's like scrummaging coaching. Push. It's not working. Push harder. Yeah, that sort of stuff.
Well, after trying to coach scrummaging, I'm at a loss to describe what else to do. In fact, I think that's exactly why people just go for massive props, because it's so hard to coach. It's almost impossible to coach.
It's very hard, and actually a lot of it is, there's a lot to be said for learning by doing. And scrummaging is one of those things that it's very hard to, like a lot of things in sport. I mean, there's a guy on an Australian rugby league podcast I listen to, who's a bit of a legend in the game, and he's not everyone's cup of tea, but I think he's really interesting, and he's had a lot of success, and he's very experienced, well into his 60s now, Phil Gould. And he talks very interestingly now about the halfbacks in rugby league. And he firmly believes now that the sweet spot for a halfback in rugby league is between 25 and 35.
Totally agree with that.
Because it takes them at least, even the superstars who come through, the Marcus Smiths and the and those types of people, Finn Smith, who come through very, very young, still takes them 4, 5, 6 years to really start to understand the game. They've got the skills. And it's a lot of rugby league halfbacks as they get older talk about the game slowing down. The game seems to go into slow motion for them. They seem to have so much, they feel they've got so much more time, even though they're not probably physically at the peak of their powers. And I think scrummaging, how we got onto that, scrummaging, I think, is partly, I played there myself, and a lot of it was feel and working out why that worked and why that didn't. And when they did this, you did that. And it just had to...
It's almost impossible.
learn.
It's almost impossible to describe feel. I found the same thing. So I'm trying to coach these lads to play prop. I just can't tell them. I've told them one thing, but actually what they need to do in this situation is completely the opposite thing. And I don't know how to tell them how to recognise the situation. So in the end, you just teach them to push harder and harder and harder.
I used to find pain was a pretty good indicator.
Yeah,
feeling uncomfortable and in a position where you were not in control was always a good indicator.
Yeah. Anyway, talking of
not easy.
Talking of
regulator.
Talking of control, let's talk about the football regulator. So
yeah.
Well, first of all, are you aware of how this all came about?
Yes.
Somebody, I assume it's the Labour Party, but I'm not entirely sure, but somebody commissioned some sort of poll of football fans, and it was the football fans that came back and said, we need various things in order to make sure the game is, sustainable, which I thought was an incredible comment, but also governed by an independent regulator, which the major problem with this, of course, is whoever you're interviewing fan-wise has probably got no idea about how to run a sports club, and there's only a certain type of fan which would probably fill in this questionnaire or do the survey anyway.
It came... Look, there've been talk about an independent regulator in lots of industries for decades, and we have them, of course, in lots of industries, some goods, some not so good.
Yep.
So there's nothing... I don't think there's anything... particularly alarming about a regulator for what has become quite a big industry. And I think there were a few things along the way which created a big movement for this. The biggest one, I think, was do you remember the reaction to the proposed Super League breakaway?
Yes, I think that was probably the big one, wasn't it?
The big European clubs. That was a big one. The one before that, and one I've got to say, I supported, so I was in a minority, which was the 39th game. Do you remember that?
Oh, was this in America?
Well...
It was an exhibition game somewhere, wasn't it?
No, they weren't exhibition games. That was the whole...
No,
that's
you're
why
right.
people got upset. The idea was you played your 38 games, 19 home and away, and then you played a 39th team in neutral venues to grow the sport and obviously at the end of the day, grow the broadcast revenues. That's what it's all about. So rather than just taking teams on friendly tours to the Far East or the States or Australia, which all the big teams do, you actually ramp it up a notch. It's a bit like the NFL, taking NFL games to London and to Germany and to Mexico. And it's not a stupid idea. But both of those things generated quite a backlash. And I think at the same time, the last big governance restructure, because that's what it was, when the Premier League broke away from the FA, has over time, I think, led more and more fans of the game to feel that it was they'd lost control or any influence. Not control, they'd lost influence, and that their views were unheard. And at the same time, there were worries and concerns about which there always have been in football, and you've heard me talk about them in rugby as well, because we've had a bit of it as well. You know, sequestration of assets, property scams using, the grounds.
Yeah.
I mean, there are, I think, justifiable concerns about clubs being owned by sovereign states.
Maybe.
I think that's really interesting. And so, or quasi-sovereign states. And then there's stuff you and I talked about.
I mean, if you want a real business risk, the UK government regulating football. Now, the proposals, I must say, are very mild. So the proposals themselves...
That's not what's being proposed. Well, that's been a bit of a scare story, hasn't it?
Well, hang on a second, right? So, yes, it's independent. Yes, it's third party, but it will be appointed by someone, and there will be some political influence on it somewhere, because that's the whole nature of it. But in terms of a real risk, I mean, what about politic? So you've got a country like Saudi Arabia who wants something. I mean, they could put pressure on anyone, including a regulator. In fact, more so on a regulator than just say a wealthy business person. In fact, the regulator would be the point of failure.
Well, if you look at, and it's very interesting for our listener, it's all on the DCMS website. Yeah. If you go and have a look, the proposals in some detail are all in the public domain, that you can just go and read them. And they've been there since 2020, I think, from memory.
Well, just on that, Mark, why don't I just read you the seven proposals? So the first is the independent regulator. Okay, fine. Mm-hmm. The second is club licensing system. Then it's owner and directors test, financial regulation, fan engagement and protection, power...
Sorry, say that one again?
Fan engagement and protection.
Yeah.
Power to block breakaway leagues. And the last one, redistribution of wealth. Now, except for number 7 and number 6, I mean, they're not particularly egregious or have the potential to be egregious, I don't think.
Well, except that you would say there have been some, and this is the argument in favour, of course, there have been some quite significant failures in those areas in a number of countries in the relatively recent past within football and other sports. Mm. I mean, the interesting thing at the minute is, I was with a very close friend over the weekend, and he's a mad keen football guy, West Ham fan, and a very bright guy, and has had a stellar business career. And his take on financial fair play was really interesting, which obviously, Man City are in court this week. That's taken years to come to court.
And it'll take years to resolve.
Every legal impediment in the way of that for years.
Yep.
And his view on it was, it's simply a way. Tim would have loved this argument. He felt it's simply a way of keeping the richest and successful clubs in that position.
That's totally my view.
And he points out to the fact that it's a barrier to entry.
Yep.
And then, ironically, I felt, because as you can imagine, intuitively I go the other way, that look at Newcastle United now, owned by an extraordinarily, effectively the Saudi Arabian government. Let's not shilly-shally about it. It's not that technically, but it is. Same way that Manchester City is Abu Dhabi. And Paris Saint-Germain is Oman or Qatar. One of the two, I can't remember. Is it Qatari?
It
right.
Is.
And his proposal was interesting, and it's one that you and I have discussed as well. He felt the way to fix it up and for it to not distort and make it very hard for new entrants, which in a very large football market like football, you are still getting, whereas in rugby in England at the moment, not so in some other places, but in England, a dearth of new entrants, I think it's fair to say. But anyway, we'll come back to that. His big one was, and I thought, gosh, it's French rugby. Isn't this interesting? He said, you got to stop allowing people to leverage it. You can't have the one I would support, which would allow genuine investment in and stop a lot of the financial, I don't know what's the right word, jiggery pokery. That's not the good word. I'll come back with a better one, but that's the best one I've got at the moment. No loans, only equity.
Yes. So this would be the anti-Manchester United view in a way, wouldn't it?
This is, you say, yes.
You buy it with debt, you roll up the debt, you pay the interest off right at the end.
We don't want the private equity model where you just load it up with debt. You want a genuine investment model where people put their capital at risk. Right? That was his. And I must admit, it's going to be interesting to see how some of these, whether this regulator will have any teeth.
Yes.
I mean, you got 58% of football league clubs at the moment are technically insolvent.
So this is the thing, right? Like, this is where I really struggle with looking at sports clubs as standard businesses, because they're simply not standard businesses. I mean, they're no more a standard business than if a rich individual owns a racehorse. You spend money on your racehorse and it's a hobby. And sometimes that hobby generates...
Again, you've got to be a little bit careful, because in some countries, in some sports, they're incredibly successful businesses. All of them. Even the ones at the bottom of the pile, at the bottom of the league. So I think I do know what you're saying, and I do, and to a degree, certainly in the sport we love in this country, I'd be hard pressed to argue against you.
Yeah.
But my argument would be, it doesn't have to be that way, because I could point you to any number of examples where genuinely investing, putting equity into a sports organization or league has proved to be a really successful business opportunity. So people have made, and sometimes, and my problem is with it, people who do that should not, I don't like it when it's heavily leveraged.
Yes.
So I've got that, because then, there's a lot more risk to the club and to the heritage and to the league and to competition and all the rest of it that I get, as you know, quite concerned about. And I think it threatens long-term financial stability. I am less concerned. This is why I love the French regulators so much, and they've been there for well over 20 years now. You can't load up your rugby club in France with debt. You have to clear it, or you have to put in equity. Yeah. And they will not let you start the next season unless you clear it. And if you don't, you go down 2 leagues.
I do wonder.
Or 3 leagues or whatever.
I mean, I can't really think of an example right now of something which has been successful with all this financial trickery. But it does make me wonder, could there be some innovation which the sport misses, whether it be rugby, whether it be football, things like third-party player ownership, which of course was outlawed, but they do it in the United States for young baseball players, or some method of ownership, or something which would be beneficial. But we've just said no, you can't do that because the regulator says no.
We've already got that in football, and again, it depends which sport you're talking about. There's always already quite a lot of evidence about players in Latin America coming into Europe who are genuinely part owned by investors and financial bodies. So it's not like it doesn't already.
But you're not allowed them. You're not allowed those players in the Premier League.
No, well, I think that's. I think I would go along with that. I'm not sure that I think there's some major. I think there's some major moral hazards in that particular example. But I'd come back to the fact that, for now, let's say, and I know I tend to always go to Australia and the United States, but people have made huge amounts of money owning big sports franchises in the United States.
Yes, but ironically...
It is today almost impossible to lose money if you own an NRL club.
Yeah.
You've got to work really hard at it.
But...
you really do.
Here's the issue, right? The way this regulator is set up, say if it's there to protect football in its current guise, in order to get a professional, profitable sport, NRL, NFL, whatever it may be, has to take measures which would be phenomenally unpopular with football fans, whether it be ring fencing,
and therefore I don't think
salary
that's
caps.
What this is. I don't think it is. This, I think, is more. This looks and feels to me, and obviously I don't work in football, and I'm sure there's a lot of the detail I'm not across. But it looks and feels to me about protection from exploitation rather than an attempt to somehow turn English football into a quasi-American Australian model. So I think it's really interesting, for example.
Yeah, but the really controversial change would have been the European Super League, which actually has all the hallmarks of an American/Australian style competition.
Absolutely.
And that's why it's coming in.
Which is phenomenally, and I'm not saying it won't eventually come in. It is phenomenally unpopular in England.
Yeah.
I do think to a degree, I would sort of say, yeah, I get that. Didn't hear you shouting too much when the emergence of 4 or 5 leagues in Europe, including the one your club's part of, completely meant that Belgian, Dutch, Portuguese, Romanian clubs would never ever again win a European Cup. Didn't see the howls of protest when that happened because it didn't affect you and your team or your country.
Yeah, I mean,
so if on the other hand, you know me, I believe sports is a market failure on the whole. You have to intervene, and otherwise you will get my classic like Scottish football, and the lack of intervention, I think, in the last 20 years has done more harm than good. I'm not saying it hasn't done any good. Let's just stop on
Scottish football a second.
Done more harm.
So Scottish football is quite an interesting one because it's kind of the example of what happens to small sports leagues and they're drained of their talent. I was in Ibiza.
Or Portugal. Portugal's the same.
So I was in Ibiza
Holland.
And I was with a couple of Northern Irish lads. And they said, right, we're going to go watch football. I've never seen a Scottish game in my life. I don't think. Not for a long, long time. In fact, I'll tell you the last Scottish game I watched. Annie McCoist was playing in a Scottish Cup final, and I happened to watch it because it's on the BBC. That's the only Scottish game.
You didn't watch it live then? You were just watching it on telly?
Yeah. There's a pub in Ibiza, which is absolutely rammed with Rangers and Celtic fans. I'm like, well, if this is a dying league and a dying sport, they're not doing too badly here.
Look, it's the national sport, and nobody's arguing. Well, I'm not arguing. I don't think anyone would that the dominance of the 4/5 biggest European leagues, where all the best globe players from whichever country they're from play in, and everybody else is a feeder. Has that meant that the Dutch aren't still besotted with football? No, of course it hasn't done that. Does it mean the Scottish aren't still besotted with football? No, it hasn't done that. Scottish football's no smaller, no bigger at club level. I just think it's really dull. But then Scottish football has been dull for decades to an outsider.
That's the important part.
To an outside. However, it has become duller because you go back historically and occasionally Aberdeen under Ferguson, Dundee United under Jim McLean. There were pockets of time when it was possible, even though the whole thing was skewed because revenues weren't distributed evenly and the big got bigger and the small got smaller and all the rest of it. And the people in the big conurbation, Glasgow, miles bigger than anywhere else, with the two big clubs, with a lot of cultural significance and religious connotations and all the rest of it, dominated. But now they dominate even more. And I'm not sure it's the classic, what might be good for the individual might not be good for the group and vice versa. I'm not sure that just allowing that to carry on. And a European Super League is the natural end of that process. You know, it's why they set up the European Cup in the first place. In some ways, it was like, well, yeah, but even back then, you know, certain clubs in particularly in the smaller companies, you know, who used to win the Portuguese league? Well, Benfica or Porto or Sporting Lisbon. That was about it. Yeah. Who used to win the Dutch league? Well, Ajax, Feyenoord, or PSV. There was one other. There was a Rotterdam team that I've forgotten the name now. PSV. Anyway. Sorry? PSV, of course, Eindhoven. Yeah. There were 3 or 4, but that was it. You know? And even now in some of the big leagues. I mean, was it Bayern won 12 in a row, was it, before last year?
But people love it.
Or something?
It's just what they love.
People still... But I do think one of the great aphorisms is, if you are fortunate enough to be the national sport, and it doesn't matter which sport, if you are fortunate enough to culturally have grown up as the most popular national sport, maybe winter and summer, or in Germany, just football, you can make any number of mistakes and people will still love it because it's so culturally important.
Yeah, and good times are only just round the corner.
And the fact is that that's what people play when they're kids. It's what their dad and their mum take them to watch. It's what they go to with their mates. And actually, it's got a lot more meaning than just a game of sport. But coming back to the regulator, I think there was a lot of nonsense in some of those newspaper headlines were ridiculous.
Which ones?
Oh, they're all kinds of. England may get thrown out of the Euros.
Well, I mean, they're very strict rules in UEFA and FIFA. No government interference.
I know they're strict. Yeah, have a look at the rules about government interference in World Rugby. They're just as strict.
Yeah, but they're right. I mean, I think they're right. I think they are right.
So do I. But this is not an independent regulator. Is not government control.
You say that,
and at the moment, you're arguing. I think you're arguing just because you're naturally suspicious of it.
Yes, I am.
I think you're arguing self-regulation. I think
some form of it. I don't think
you're arguing for no regulation, are you?
Well, no, because you have to have regulation for the NRL, the NFL. So you got to have something, right?
So someone's got to regulate it.
Yeah.
So you either get the clubs. Now we've split between the FA and the Premier League. We've got 2 regulators. And now you've got to decide, are you going to let the Premier League clubs regulate themselves, which was what we've always done. And they allowed or agreed the FA keeps some regulatory powers. But are you seriously going to argue that we shouldn't have stronger fit and proper person tests?
Well, okay, so let's just go back a second. One of the things which made me laugh is we need a regulator for sustainability. Now, I've been to Anfield, and when I was at Anfield, I remember seeing a bunch of South Koreans walk in with Liverpool hats. I thought, how wonderful is that? How absolutely wonderful is it? They've got this cultural phenomena in England where South Koreans want to come over and watch. I mean, I know football fans hate it. I think that's one of the coolest, most remarkable things that people around the world are willing to spend their life savings in some cases to watch a game.
And it's quite rare, JB, because most South Koreans come and watch Tottenham.
Is that right? Oh, because of What's his name?
Swan.
Yeah. But I just thought that was the coolest thing. So to think that we need more regulation because what exactly? Sustainability. I mean, it's one of the most popular exports. Might be the only export the UK has left. So, yeah, I just thought...
ridiculous.
That was a joke.
Carry on. You're exaggerating to make a point. Carry on.
So I just couldn't see the point in that. There are some things in here which I don't mind, The owner and director test, I think we found that the hard way with rugby, didn't we, really?
Oh, well, there's some terrible examples over the years. You remember that lunatic who took over Blackpool? I mean,
Owen, is it Owen Oster?
Yes.
Is that the boy?
Yes. Oyston, wasn't it, or something?
Owen Oyston, but he did get them to the Premier League, to be fair.
He almost
did?
Completely destroyed the club as well.
But what a ride.
If that... Oh, no, I'm sorry, I can't buy that. I just cannot buy that. But I think it's really interesting. I also happen to think that if this is a way of giving fans a voice to a degree, or at least an avenue at which they might be able to exert some influence, I think that has to be a good thing.
I don't know.
In the same way that I think it's a good thing that the workforce and employees in large companies have some influence on the governance of the company. I
think they're analogous, but I think they're fundamentally different. I think your fans are a barometer of how well you're doing. So I don't see why
yeah.
Well, why should I have any...
If that were true, how do you account for clubs in the third tier? Like, and they may not be there this year, but they have been there for a long time, like Portsmouth and Sheffield Wednesday, who are still dragging in 30,000 a week. That ain't about success, is it?
No, I guess not. But there again, why should I have a say in how the Oakland Raiders are run?
Because you're a stakeholder.
I'm very... I mean, you won't surprise you to hear I'm very suspicious of stakeholder principles, but I shouldn't, is the answer. I mean, I came to Oakland Raiders to follow them. Why not? I'll tell you why, because I had first pick in the draft and they were absolutely dreadful. I think I was attracted to that sport because of what it is. I don't think I should have a say in how that sport is then modelled going forward. I think if you're a player...
I don't think that's right. I mean, because take that to its logical conclusion. If I'm a customer of a retailer, I have no rights at all.
No, not really.
Okay, so you're not in favour of any kind of customer protection legislation?
Well, that's different, isn't it? So you ensure the quality.
Why is that different? Well, wouldn't you say that protection for fans and players and having the ground sold from under their feet is an excellent example of customer protection?
Well, when I say... Okay, so in terms of customer protection... I don't consider customer protection because it exists. However, if it didn't exist, I think it would be a remarkably good way to market your product. So I don't think it wouldn't exist just because the regulations don't exist.
And yeah, but at the same time, you see, I thought you were going to say then, as a customer, and this is why I think sport does need excellent regulatory arrangements. Mm-hmm. Be it an independent regulator or an in-house regulator, I'm equally suspicious as you are of direct government regulation. I don't think that but in most markets, if you don't like it, you can go and buy something somewhere, the same thing somewhere else. Mm-hmm. You can vote with your feet. Yep. Okay, you can allocate your economic vote somewhere else. Mm. People can't change their sports clubs. We're born into them.
Yeah, but you know what?
We're born into them. We can. I could no more start supporting Arsenal than fly to the moon.
Well, we have emails all the time from rugby fans, particularly Wasps, obviously, a bit from Worcester, but yeah, actually mostly Wasps, because they were probably the best supported club that went under. And oh no, we had one from London Irish just this week, and it seems to be the beneficiary of the Wasps and London Irish fans are not other Premiership clubs, and not even other sports. They're clubs lower down the pyramid. And I think that's really quite interesting. I don't think you can shop around as a consumer for a peer club, but you can certainly shop around as a consumer for a lower league club. And that happens all the time. I mean, look at United and FC United. I mean, that is still going strong. Salford United. Is it Salford FC or Salford United? Over in North Manchester. Doing phenomenally well. Great little stadium.
Well, the classic. All right. You play Salford. I'll call that and raise it with Wimbledon.
Yeah.
Because when Wimbledon were originally Sam Hammam trying to relocate them in Dublin, which was an anathema to the fan, but I mean, from a business point of view, was a stroke of genius. Dublin, by a country mile, the largest city in Europe without a professional football team. By it's them and daylight. Okay, so I could see what he was trying to do. Here we are, I'm a little South London club that's come out the Southern League, unbelievable journey, crazy gang, FA Cup final, 1-0, beat Liverpool, blah, blah, blah. Let's go to Dublin and make some serious money. And then people howled, but they ended up, the franchise, which people in England hate, off to Milton Keynes. The story I would, however, is the group of fans then just could not bring themselves to follow their team to Buckinghamshire.
Yep.
Nor could they follow Chelsea or Palace or Millwall or Fulham or the 13 other clubs in the Greater London area. They stuck with it and tried to rebuild their club. There is virtually no other product that we buy in the Western world that has that kind of brand loyalty. It just doesn't exist anymore anywhere else. And that's why the fans need some form of reassurance, protection.
Whoa, hang on. But I think you missed
whatever it might be. Whatever it might be.
Have you not missed a step here? Because currently in Football League 2, which is no joke, are MK Dons. And you'd be saying, well, we're not going to give you the opportunity to do that. They have had a phenomenal time. It has been a great story. And I think once you start meddling around with these things, you don't get these stories. I mean, once upon a time, Wasps and Harlequins were the same team. Were they not?
No. The meeting in 1866, from which the two clubs emerged, was talking about a merger, which then didn't happen.
It didn't separate. But I mean, I guess my point still stands, which is just let it develop, because MK Dons is its own team in its own right. And
you see, I think you are giving a green light to charlatans and crooks to asset strip organisations that have cultural and social significance.
Yeah, but you can only play that card for so long, as FC United have shown, as MK Dons have shown. You're not impervious, so you can play around with these things.
Well,
you might make.
Well, tell that to West Hartlepool rugby fans who've no longer got a club or a ground.
I played West Hartlepool.
Tell that to Wakefield.
I played West Hartlepool. I played West Hartlepool 2 years ago. They're a phenomenal club.
Lost their ground, lost their club, effectively kept the name. That's all they did. Tell that to Wakefield, who used to produce England internationals on a regular basis. The club's still it, but look at Moseley, one of the great clubs, one of the best grounds in the country. Effectively, and I apologies to Moseley, I'm exaggerating, make a point. Little more than a parks club. If you don't regulate, for all its drawbacks and weaknesses, if you just make it a free for all, you're giving the shysters free rein.
Yeah, I mean, my worry about that is it'd be some sort of like charter for elitist credentialists to take over the entire game. And I like the fact that
you worry about mission creep, don't you?
I do. That is like so. So there are a few things.
I do too.
Okay. Yeah. So the two things I'd be concerned about, right? 6, power to block a breakaway league. Whatever. 7, redistribution of wealth. I mean, I think the Premier League in of itself is quite generous with grassroots football.
Do you?
I do. I don't think it has any.
Do you?
I don't think it has any obligations to give any money anywhere. And I think in rugby terms, I'd say exactly the same thing. Like, I just don't agree. Yeah. In fact, I don't even agree with RFU spending, like, most of the times for the grassroots.
We fundamentally disagree, don't we, on this sort of thing? I believe the whole thing's an ecosystem, and if you do not have a reasonably equitable distribution to its different constituent parts, the whole system will eventually either collapse or not thrive. You know, again, I'll give you an example. And people bang on about France all the time, as you know, and you've heard me talk about it. And you know, in some ways, the markets are not comparable because of the size and the scale. But one thing I would say that the French get right, and one of the reasons why the game there is thriving, is that they give 28% of total broadcast revenues to Pro D2.
Mm-hmm. Which is an extension of Pro Rugby, in fairness. So if you look at professional rugby in its entirety...
my point was, it didn't used to be.
No.
That has not always been the case. That has been a conscious decision taken by, well, you could say taken by the top 14. I prefer to say taken by the game.
Mm-hmm.
If this game is going to prosper, and we are that's far too emotive, and we are competing against volleyball and football and tennis and all the other things that people could spend their hard-earned dollars and eyeballs watching, we need to keep the whole ecosystem healthy. It's a network.
It is a network.
And that requires redistribution because, and you've heard me say this before, and I keep going back to Wales, I know, but if you allow the game to wither, particularly its pathways and development programs, which always need funding, they cannot generate money to fund themselves.
I have many things to say about pathways. But hang on, let's just go back to the network and the ecosystem, right? So this is something which I spoke to an RFU councilman about not so long ago. And so I think about Northwest Rugby. And what used to happen, and it doesn't happen anymore because they got rid of the community coaches, but if you needed help, you'd pick up the phone to a community coach and they'd send someone down and they're very well-meaning and very nice and they'd deliver a great session and you could learn stuff. But actually, that was the wrong way to do it because that was never necessary. So now they've got rid of the community coaches, so you can't phone them. But actually, that was always the wrong thing to do because what you should have done is you should have phoned somebody in the local club who was a little bit higher than you or a little bit lower than you or in a league just across. So the amount I have learned by picking up the phone to talk to other rugby coaches, and that's what should be encouraged. That's the real ecosystem.
The two things are not mutually exclusive.
No, but mission creep in one does destroy the other. No, it doesn't. That's absolute nonsense. There, I've done it again. The fact that you could pick the phone up and talk to somebody in your network who will help and give you good sound advice or make suggestions does not mean that there is not also a role for people who work across the whole region or the whole county or however you want to organise it. Because, for instance, how do you run rep teams? You're just going to leave it just to volunteers, are you? Well, yeah.
How are you going to run the Lancashire age? How are you going to run the Lancashire age groups? How are you going to know who's going to do the coach training? Who's going to do coach development?
Coach training, coach development is a great one, okay? So this is exactly where my principle comes into play. A lot of people would say, well, that's right, because the RFU have taught this. And then if you actually talk to numerous coaches about the same thing, like the breakdown, for example, you get so many different opinions. You talk to one coach, you go, I don't think that's entirely right. Then you talk to another one, you go, that's a bit more right. If it's a centralised message...
That's not what coach development is about, right? That's nothing to do with coach. I'm not saying it's unimportant, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that isn't coach development. Coach development is you have to have a system and a process that for the game in an area, define the area as you will, we have, and it's really difficult, we have sufficient, well-trained, well-informed, well-supported people who can deliver engaging sessions at a variety of age groups and higher than that into rep teams. And you can't just do that through some kind of individualized network. That is not to say, it's not either or, that the individualized network isn't important, because it is. We've all got mentors. Those of us who've been coaching for more years than we care to remember, although me not so much lately, but certainly between the ages of, 19 and 50, I coached pretty much every year, right? And I could tell you how influential certain people, some of whom never coached professionally, others whom were effectively educators, others of whom were professional coaches. They were all incredibly influential. Right? And I also remember, it doesn't happen now, some of the most impactful weeks of my career within the game were spent taking the most frighteningly difficult coaching courses, at which the pass rate was 10%. You had to take a week off work and you had a 90% chance of failure. But they were run by these incredibly talented people, like Chalky White and Alan Davis and Tony Russ and Rob Smith and Dick Best. And you had access to these people who were, at the time in their era, the best coaches in the country.
Yeah, and
in an organized way, and with ruthless evaluation.
So I'm going to have to be careful. I get my words right here because I might end up sounding like a moron. But I think if you look at the coaching techniques of, say, let's think of who is the Scottish forwards coach? Jim
Telfer.
Jim Telfer, right? Now, Jim Telfer, would you agree he's a good coach back in the day?
Oh, God, yeah.
Right. Jim Telfer used to get people to lie on the floor and have the scrum walk over them. I am all for that, right? If that works, I am all for that, right? Now, that is obviously good enough for internationals. Can you imagine an RFU bod coming down saying, right, let's get that guy on the floor and let's scrimmage over him? No.
Well,
so the problem with the centralised stuff is they don't necessarily do it. Go on.
You'll have to believe me when I tell you that story.
Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head-to-head for the last chicken wing. Shop Game Day Faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
Chimes with any number of other stories I could tell you from RFU funded and led coaching courses that I attended over many years.
Yes, and I don't doubt that they were like that back in the day, but of course being a centralised body, you can't do that forever, and they certainly couldn't do it now. Imagine your RFU bod.
Why couldn't they do it?
Can you imagine your RFU bod saying, right, let's get Jessica, lie her on the floor, and we'll get the women to ruck over her? No, not in a million years. And so the message is
however, moving, otherwise we're going to go in such a rabbit hole. But I think we sort of, so much as we plan any of these, we did say we were going to try and sort of morph out of the football regulator into the PGB agreement, because I think there are some really quite interesting parallels. Hidden in the small print.
Well, I thought the same actually. So before we go into that, shall I just read you I think we've got 7 headlines of what the PGA actually covers, and then you can pick whatever you want to talk about.
Yes, go on then.
So the key points of the professional game agreement are: 1, player release and international duty; 2, revenue sharing; 3, player welfare and rest periods; 4 is a salary cap; 5, development and pathways; 6, club and RFU relationship; and 7, the women's game.
Oh, I didn't know that.
No, I didn't know that the women's game was included. But,
the bits that jumped out at me, and I should say 2 things from the beginning. 1, we're working with imperfect knowledge here, because you need to be in the room to actually know what's been agreed. And they have not published, I don't think, the agreement. It's probably not in long form yet.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping it's going to go into long form. I'm hoping, in the interest of transparency, it will be published on a public forum. So I reserve the right, once I've read it, if we do ever read it, to change my mind. But, my general feeling was there were some things in it that I've clearly been arguing for decades. So that's encouraging.
Okay.
And the things that there is a big but coming, by the way. The things that I thought, oh well, that's good to see, was independent chair, 2 further independent members, representation for the first time for the players' union.
Which players' union is that, though?
Sorry?
Which players' union is that? I know it sounds like a silly question, but they're
the English, the RPA.
The RPA, not the new English players representative.
Well, not the exclusive. Just look after a few now. Unions don't tend to work well like that, but there we are.
Okay.
You can't negotiate with a body and represent about 20 people.
Well, it depends if they make all of your money. Which they do make all of the money.
I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but I think that's nonsense. 3 from Premier Rugby, 3 from the RFU. That does look a little bit more like the type of setup you might be interested in.
Just, I'm going to stop you there. Tell me why you're interested in that. What do you like about it?
Because traditionally, there's been no independence representation on it at all. Mm-hmm. And therefore it's tended to divide into 2 warring tribes.
Yeah.
And, casting votes and all that nonsense. So it tends to indicate a genuine desire, and maybe I'm being optimistic, to have more of a partnership rather than a confrontational approach.
And I just want you to
So I think that's good.
I just want to put you on the spot a second here. If you were to appoint 2 independent members, what kind of individual would you be looking for? Someone from inside the sport or someone completely outside of it?
I've had some experience of this recently when we were putting the board of the Druid together, and I was already in place, and I had to work for the first 6 months without a board.
Is that when I missed your call?
Sorry, which was extremely difficult. I tell you, as a CEO with no board to work to, it's not a very comfortable position.
Yeah.
But when we were eventually we were allowed to put the board together, and that had been put together very well. It was like sort of five board members, 3 independent, 1 from the government, 1 from the rugby union, and the chairman had to be one of the independents. Now, that was one of a number of things that allowed the Druid to operate relatively untrammeled. And this, to me, looks like a first attempt, albeit, to try and move away from this sort of towards a more genuine partnership. So that was good. I liked the idea that in the second 4 years, the money going to the clubs is at least linked to some kind of percentage of revenue, they call it. And I heard the pod this week, profit before rugby investment. But
Investment.
But that's a good start. It's not a finish because, of course, but then there's another bit in it that seems to work very well with that. But I'd love to see the detail on this, where it says that the salary cap from 25 to 26 onwards will be aligned to, quote, key central financial metrics.
That I missed that.
Doesn't actually say what they are, but it's a start.
That's very interesting, because presumably that would be a salary cap of 0, looking at the current financial metrics. It'll be linked to rugby revenues, not just because the thing about the PGA agreement, the 26% comes from the FRU, from the RFU into the clubs. But then there's other income the clubs generate locally or within PR Premiership Rugby. So the salary cap needs to be linked to all the revenues. Yes.
And it needs to have a salary cap collar. And you've heard me talk about this before. But it's a good first step. We've never had it. I think that's good. And then the one that you and I will applaud, but I say, don't see the detail, which is to implement the independent financial monitoring panel.
To implement the independent yes, okay. It'd be interesting.
In other words, they've already got it, but it's never been implemented. Now, this ought to be the English equivalent of the DNGCR in France.
Yes.
They've got an extraordinarily well qualified, eminent guy running it.
Who's that?
Way above rugby's pay grade, in my view. He's a storied sort of financial guy, with incredible reputation. My question is, that came in after COVID. We're a couple of years on, and now maybe there are, and again, you don't know the detail. Maybe they took the view, until we come to an agreement with the FRU and the Players Union, there's no point, so we'll just put it on hold. But whatever, if they do bring that in with teeth, there's my other question. It's all very well saying we're going to have a monitoring panel to monitor.
Yep.
That's a good start. The next question is, and what are you going to do when people break the guidelines? What's the teeth?
Yeah.
In other words, are you going to do it like the French? Are you going to say, look, here are the things, and if you break those, not just the salary cap, there's a whole lot of other metrics, there are going to be consequences.
Weirdly, I've never heard of any of the other metrics.
And these consequences are going to be significant.
Yeah, so I've not actually heard of any other metrics in the English game. Do you have any idea what they may be or what they currently are?
What the other metrics might be?
Yeah.
Well, they might come up with a metric over debt and equity, mightn't they?
Yeah. Oh, but there's no existing ones, is there? Is there?
No, not that I've seen. No.
I mean, you can't...
Sorry. That's not quite true. That's a bit unfair.
Yeah.
They did make some quite significant changes to the salary cap regs after the Saracens and whatever.
Yep.
And I think they've made some significant changes to some of the regulatory stuff around fit and proper and wealth tests. Talking of which, that was another thing we did mention about the football regulator. They're going to bring in a wealth test for owners. I think that's a really, really good move.
So the Saudis have to send in their bank statements.
Well, you can be as flippant as you like, but sport is littered with. I mean, maybe you're too young. Who can ever forget Michael Knighton?
Michael Knighton
on the pitch at Old Trafford, juggling a ball.
Stop, Mark. I have to stop you there. Is he the guy who nearly bought it?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure my dad's colleague at TSB did his banking. They were going to lend him the money.
Well, as it
Actually, I
turned
might have to
out,
edit that out because my dad would be furious if I said that.
would have failed any serious wealth test in a heartbeat. But look, the world is full of shysters, and it's also got its fair share of Walter Mitty characters.
It has.
And they've both got a track record in sport, and anything we can do in our sport to mitigate that and reduce the likelihood of them ever gaining. I keep coming out in a cold sweat when I think about some of the people who got on the executive board of Premiership Rugby while they owned Worcester Warriors. Was an absolute indictment of the regulatory situation we'd had for years. So my sort of, I suppose my summary about my reaction to the PGA is it's got some promising signs.
Yep.
But a bit like the French Revolution, it's a little early to tell.
Yeah, well, let's hope it doesn't end up quite like the French Revolution. Just on unlikely owners and wealth tests. I mean, I'm not saying preventing this in any way, but it's just a nice little anecdote. Do you know who would have failed a wealth test? Who was a very successful owner?
Go on, tell me.
Al Davis of the Oakland Raiders. He was a coach.
Oh, really?
He was a coach.
What, the Al Just Win baby Davis of the Oakland Raiders.
And then he became the AFL commissioner, and then he led that into, I think it was him. Was it?
Didn't he do the merger with Didn't he do the merger?
Him and Pete Rosenzell, I think. I want to say, but I might have that detail wrong. But he definitely owned. Well, he did. He was definitely a coach first, and then ended up owning the Raiders when such a thing was possible.
Yeah, and he didn't have much, did he? Didn't have.
Well, unless I've missed part of his story. I mean, he might have. He might have been the son of a some sort of entrepreneur or industrial titan. I have no idea. But just off the top of my head, he was a coach who became an owner and sort of fell into everything. And there's another guy as well who was seconds away from owning the New York Cosmos, and that's a fascinating story.
Oh, that is a fascinating story. But look, sport's full of them all over the world, and can you ever keep them all out? No. Do they do great damage when they get in? Yes, they do. Should we be trying to minimise the chances? Yes, we should.
Yeah, I'm not on
And never mind all these accusations of over-regulation, red tape, bureaucracy, merging into the nanny state. Just protect your sport.
Yeah, I'm slightly different. I think I want about 95% of the people in the game to be super competent. And just leave that 5% open for an absolute renegade. So in 30 years' time, we can talk about...
Surely, it's your love of the maverick.
It is.
Surely you can get enough mavericks in the playing and the coaching fraternity to scratch that itch.
I don't know. I like the idea that someone can somehow accidentally buy a team. And in some cases,
you'd have. I don't know if you knew him. It might have been before your time. And he was not. He was a lovely man, and he was also had the wherewithal. But I mean, do you remember the guy used to? Oh, the family still does own a chunk of the Saints. But do you remember the guy who used to run Northampton Saints back in the day?
Oh no, I can't say I do.
Keith Barwell.
Yes, yeah. Well, he was the owner, was he not?
I mean. Oh, yeah. Oh, God, very much so. And it would have been his son who then tragically died very young, in middle age. And, Keith was just a real guy. He would have satisfied your desire to see mavericks and characters at the ownership table. He was brilliant. I loved him.
Now, talking of mavericks and things which are slightly, well, not unusual, but a continuation of a story that's been going on for decades, English-Welsh League. This merger.
Yeah, the URC Prem, yeah. Well, yes. Okay, at first glance, I thought this was a load of old tosh. And I couldn't see how on earth this was going to get anywhere. Because, the South Africans bring too many eyeballs to the table to dismiss them.
Totally agree.
They bring too much I think you've heard me say, or you and I may have talked offline or whatever, maybe it's other people I've been talking to the last couple of weeks. South African rugby appears to have hit a tipping point whereby it is genuinely now in with a chance of being a multiracial, full-on, nationally significant sport.
I completely agree.
Which it has never been. Which it has never been. Now, there's a big country, and we are desperate for big countries who take rugby seriously. That's why I'm very encouraged about what's happening in Japan in the last 18 months. Very encouraged South Africa. France, we all know about. Ireland, not a big country, but, has gone from being a minnow to a world power. That has never, ever happened in the history of the game. Despite what you said on the podcast this week, the main one, Ireland have never been a main player like they are today. It is a relatively new phenomenon. Christ's sake, they didn't win a Grand Slam between 1948 and the noughties, right? It was too small a sport. It's been extraordinary. Anyway, I couldn't see how it was going to, but then I looked at it again and thought, I went, well, the country that always wants this is Wales. Because, what the game in Wales is struggling. There's no doubt that, everybody hates the English, big brother, little brother, the Scots, the Irish, the Welsh. It's natural, 5 million, 6 million, 3 million, 55 million. It's just the way it is. And the Welsh tend, but they look at the rugby, they go, look at that. There's Exeter, there's Bristol, there's Gloucester, there's Bath. There's a third of the Premiership right on our doorstep. It's closer to get to those clubs from Cardiff than it is to get to Llanelli, and Llanelli's only 80 miles away.
Glasgow.
So I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, you know what? There is maybe one way, and I'm not sure I've thought this through entirely, where you might be able to square the circle, because the thought of cutting off Italy just as they're starting to make some progress, both at Treviso and the national team, to cut off from the potential eyeballs that South Africa brings just seems crazy.
Yeah.
Right? That just seems... Yeah. Why would they do that? It's just not in their interests. But what about this? And it would also bring about something else that I know Phil, and I keep referring back to the mothership, but I know Phil's and I have also been banging on about for years and years and years and years. And this might enable you to do it. What if you went into two conferences, but instead of going, one Scottish team in one and one Scottish team, no, keep all the derbies.
Yep.
Put the English and the Welsh in one conference, and put the Scots, the Irish, the Italians, and the South Africans in another.
That's not a bad idea, is it?
You create a playoff system of maybe top 2, top 3, maybe a barrage like the French top 14. And that's the winner of whatever you want to call that league.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And it's a genuine merger. And then you can play European Cup, gets reformatted into a knockout competition where you qualify for it in the same season through the two conferences, and you play the top 4 of French teams.
Yes. So, a few things, I think. So, but just going back...
I don't know. That's the only way I can see this having... And I haven't thought it through entirely, and I certainly haven't done the numbers. But that's quite an intriguing way of doing it.
Yeah, and also they do have common ownership now, don't they? The URC and Premier Rugby through CVC. And some people might say, well, maybe this is always the master plan. Whether it is or not, I think that is giving CVC far too much credit, actually.
I don't think there's ever been a master plan.
No, I don't.
I really don't.
No, I think the complete... No, they're not charlatans. They just relied on everyone else being charlatans. They're actually... It doesn't matter. So, a couple of observations that I'd make. First of all, the South African market is too important. And we know this because on the on the podcast, Tim does his South Africa. Sorry, that's not fair. Tim does his rugby YouTube, which is rapidly turning into a South African YouTube. And the reason is because the South African fan base is just unbelievably passionate. Like, if you look at our emails, you've never seen anything like it. As soon as we talk about South Africa, now South Africans know about us, it's just a completely different ballgame. I mean, so, yeah, I think they're on the cusp of something massive. And if they can just carry on with, I think, particularly the successful national team and the draw of players back to the Sharks and the Bulls and these phenomenal... I mean, the South African teams now, their domestic teams, are brilliant. I really enjoy watching them, and that for me has actually brought me back into the URC slightly. Certainly in Europe, how you make it work logistically, I don't think we've quite worked that out yet. But yeah, the South Africans have to stay.
Well, you see, I don't think, having now worked in Super Rugby, even in its truncated state with less travelling, I think the logistical problems of having teams in South Africa is massively overblown.
Yeah.
If you can get rid of Qatar Airways and fly them direct to London or Glasgow, it really isn't that hard.
Okay.
It really is.
So, I mean,
it's not it takes us longer to get to Perth than it does to get from London to Joburg.
Yeah, I guess it's all relative, isn't it? And, the disadvantage for the South African teams actually becomes an advantage because they are used to travelling away. Not many people are used to travelling to South Africa. So, yeah.
Compared to having to get Dunedin or Buenos Aires, which is what they used to have to do, it's a walk in the park.
Yeah. Yeah, so, okay. So, maybe the logistics are not quite so severe. Maybe the congestion, there's a few issues with the European Cup, but let's just shelve those. South Africans have to stay. In terms of the Welsh and English, there's some interesting IP in the Welsh game. Like, I do think there'd be genuine value of seeing Cardiff play. Not sure about the Ospreys, not sure about Llanelli, but Cardiff coming over to the Premiership would be nice. I mean, that feels like it could work well. So maybe them and one other, but you don't want to expand the league too much.
You can then get into a debate about how many teams in each conference and how do you get over the home and away thing and do you play cross-con. That frankly, that's all detail.
Yeah, but
I'm not saying it's unimportant, but actually, if you split it if the English and the Welsh are natural rugby partners, the heritage goes back decades.
Totally. I mean, if we could get rid of national rivalries in terms of union-led, there is no reason why the North Walian teams are not playing in Cheshire and Lancashire. That's exactly what they should be doing. Exactly. And they're not, and it winds me up no end.
And then you've got, and it doesn't make the other conference second class, because I don't think, because I saw an idea that someone said, well, we could have two divisions. That'll kill the second division.
Yeah.
Well, if you put it into, this is the top division and this is the, it's all right, we'll have promotion and relegation.
No.
I'm telling you, that second tier will be dead within 5 years.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So, yeah.
Dead.
The only the more serious point, and I think we've seen it in Super League, we've seen it in Super Rugby, and we're starting to see it in the European Cup, which breaks my heart, is the continual tinkering with formats. People like to know where they're at.
I agree.
And
I agree.
It has to be consistent. So if they're going to do it, okay, I mean, I'm not that keen, but if you're going to do it, you've got to enter into a 10-year, 15-year, 20-year agreement, and this is the competition, and it will never change. This is the format. Otherwise, you will kill the whole lot, because people will not know what they're watching.
No, I agree. I certainly think that we've had too much structural change in a whole variety of competitions. I'm not sure I'm completely sold on this idea, but if we are, I think it's the only one seriously worth considering, because I can see, I think a British league and throwing out the Italians and the South Africans has not got a prayer.
Yeah.
And it's economic vandalism.
Yeah.
I just don't get it. Right?
Particularly South Africans.
I can see, I can see a situation possibly where you have the two conference model, and you put the Anglo-Welsh together, and you put the other four countries, and maybe at some point over time and we've talked about this a lot, are going back to the NRL, who have been at 16 teams for nearly 30 years. And did not expand until they were really, really well established and highly profitable. And now they're going to put 4 on in a decade. And they're doing it very strategically.
So
they're going to 20 by 2030.
Would you be in favour of 2 conferences of equal stature operating under different financial regulations?
Well, here we come to something. I talked this over with somebody else the other day. They said, well, what about the salary cap? And I said, that's interesting, because obviously we play in a multinational league, all right? And salary levels in New Zealand are not the same as they are in Australia, and they're not the same as they are in Fiji, and they didn't used to be the same as they were in South Africa or Argentina.
Yeah.
I think, and we don't have a salary cap in quite a lot of, but we're talking about a single league. And I haven't really thought that through, because I think I'd probably start. Well, there's a whole load of things to think about. How do you do transfers? How do players move across? You don't necessarily, do you say... Well, it gives you the opportunity, for instance, to coordinate release periods between how many unions? Well, 5, 6...
Yeah.
No, 5. That's quite interesting. Would you allow the union still to put like the French do, and put a limit on the number of overseas players? I think you probably would, because you've got to some degree, you're trying to feed the national team. I mean, the whole GIF thing in France. Do you recognise, or do you not bother and say distance will do it to a degree? That actually, let's not try and equalise salaries in Italy and Ireland. They're probably the 2 extremes. Yeah. Although I think a lot of commentary about Irish salaries is a bit overblown, to be frank.
I would run divergent leagues. I would say that here's the English League. If the Welsh want to join it, you can join it, and it'll be Conference 1, and it'll be run under Premiership rules, albeit happy to negotiate for... the needs of the Welsh, but fundamentally these are the rules. Okay, so standardised release periods, all that sort of stuff. On the other side of the conference, I'd let them do whatever they want. So yeah, there was a lot of talk about, oh God, Leinster's salary cap, but then not salary cap, wages, but then at what cost? Because the real cost to Leinster is they've not won European Cup for God knows how long, and they've not even won the Pro 14 or URC or whatever it is for God knows how long.
Not for a while, but in the same way that. Also, it's very, very difficult, because you've got, I'm just trying to work out, you'd have 1, 2, 3, you've got 4 different tax regimes.
Yep. Yeah, yes, quite that too. But I think the interesting part would be, look, we're going to run our conference this way and it'll have certain results, and you're going to run your conference that way and it'll have certain results. And I like the idea of a laboratory of different ways to run it. This is what I love about European Cup.
It's quite interesting that, because you've got to be, you can't witter on too much longer, but if you're not careful, of course, all you're doing is putting on layers and layers of cost. If you say, one conference is going to run it like this and one conference. So but I tell you what, it would strip out certain current costs, because you've got 2 leagues and 2 commercial directors and 2 CEOs and 2 that you could strip out a pile of costs.
Quite. Well, I wonder if I would just run them as 2 separate leagues and then have a playoff at the end, like a repertoire at the end.
I'm not sure about that. I think I quite like the idea of 2 I'm not, as I say, I'm not completely sold on it, but whereas the first iterations I read about, I thought, not a chance. This is a classic kite flying situation.
Yeah.
and I have to say this wasn't my idea. It was somebody else that I was talking to. Said, "Well, have you thought about this and doing it this way?" And I thought, no, I hadn't actually. But now you've mentioned it, that's really interesting.
The other thing as well.
I mean, what you might do, but I don't think it's as neat and as tidy and as not as good. You see, if you just let the number of teams stay the same, you got 12 teams in one conference and 14 in the other, and that's not great.
Yeah, I mean, you can manipulate the amount of Welsh teams coming in, can't you? So you can get up to 14.
You could, but anyway.
Expand.
It also future-proofs you a little bit, not much, but a little bit, because there's gonna be pressure over the next 10 to 20 years from places like Black Lion and Lusitanos. And those franchise teams in Tier 2 nations are going to increasingly say, Black Lion in the Challenge Cup last year, but if we're going to bring them on and do a Drua-type model in Europe, which is, and I'm biased, of course, but has quite clearly seemed to have worked.
Yeah.
If you're going to be strategic about this, as a game, and we come back to the game, what's the end game of all this? Where's the, we don't ask this question enough. We talk about money, about commercial all the time, but what's the end game? What are you trying to get to? I'll tell you what, in my opinion, I tell you, how do you drive most money into the game? How it's distributed is a completely different can of worms. If you could get 16, and 16 is the really important number, genuinely competitive national teams into a World Cup, and I mean genuinely competitive.
Do you count Scotland as that?
Each of them could get to a semi-final.
Yeah, so Scotland.
That's what I mean by competitive.
Scotland, would you count them good enough?
Yeah, I'd say. Well, at the minute,
just so we've got an element of a yardstick of what you mean.
We've got. Let's say we've got 6 in Europe in the 6 nations, as long as Italy keep improving. And we've got, let's assume Australia recover, right?
Yeah.
We got 4 in the Rugby Championship. Fiji looks promising. That's 11.
Yep.
Right? Japan should. Don't suppose you, I know you're a rugby head, but don't suppose you saw Japan-Samoa last weekend, did you?
I did not.
Go and watch it. It'll restore your faith in the game.
Really?
Seriously, it's that good. It's that good. It's on, I can't remember where it's on. I think it's on Rugby Pass TV through World Rugby. Seriously, anybody out there, you want to fillip to your morale around the state of the game, go and watch that game. It's unbelievably good.
Interesting. So our theory on the podcast is the future of rugby is Latin America.
Well, and then you've got Chile. So, look, you've got 12. You've got maybe 12, but you've got to keep pushing Fiji and Japan and Italy, right? But let's say you've got 12. You need 4 more. Georgia's clearly a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Portugal strokes, I think Spain, actually.
Spain,
Portugal,
of course,
Spain. Spain.
Yeah.
Spain is a possibility. Uruguay is definitely a possibility. It's a small country. And maybe Chile. And then you also go back to USA. Right? Yeah. But let's not get diverted into who the 16 are. Because if you can get to 16, you can do all sorts of things with the World Cup with 24 teams in it.
Yeah,
you can start to get a round of 16.
Yeah,
you can start to get that's genuinely competitive. What does that do? It drives revenue. It drives eyeballs. That's where the value is there.
Well, I think,
and now walk that back. You've got to somehow find a way in the level below international rugby to build some of those teams in countries like Spain and Georgia and Portugal.
Well, what about taking Spain out of the Rugby Nations Championship and concocting some sort of Spanish-speaking Nations Cup?
Well, that's interesting, and that is happening to a degree. But I'd also, for example, I would relax. I'd try and get, and I think World Rugby might be, because World Rugby is just the other countries.
Yeah,
it's not some other entity. I think we should relax the restrictions and let effectively the national team, who is Black Lion, apart from those living overseas, and whichever one you want to call the Spanish one, and let them play as a club.
Yeah, maybe.
In other words, doing what you do, let them do what you're doing with the Drua.
Yeah.
Where that side that beat, who did we beat the weekend? Beat United States at the weekend. 19 of the 23 players were from the Drua.
Sorry, Drua beat the United States on the weekend?
Well, we were called Fiji.
Oh, right, yeah. Oh, you mean like Ireland won a Grand Slam? Sorry, Leinster won a Grand Slam. That kind of thing, yeah.
Because you've got to find a way to improve those countries above and beyond 7 or 8 or 9 international games a year.
Yeah. Now,
you could say, well, they can all do what Argentina do and then go and play in Europe. And Argentina are a really strong side. And once the Jaguares folded because of whatever, and they still regret that a great deal in Argentina, all the players went back to Europe and they're still a really good side. Semi-finalists again, just beating the All Blacks. Great.
Yeah.
Maybe you can do it that way. But I think for a side, for countries that have got a much smaller club game than Argentina have got, I think the franchise team Drua type model is a really good model.
Yeah.
And we need to try and adjust our club competitions over time to absorb it, because the prize is so huge. You know, you can fiddle about trying to drive more money out of the English Premiership. It would get dwarfed if we could get 16 genuinely competitive teams in a 2014 World Cup.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think we should leave it there, Mark. I think we've done an hour and a half, and that's far more than
God, have we really?
That's far more than our listeners deserve. Before you go, though, quick trivia question.
That's more than they will be bored senseless. They turned off 35 minutes ago, you know. Sorry, carry on.
But you just said clubs winning international games. So under Mike Ruddock, I think Wales had 2 non-Ospreys against England, and they ended up winning the Grand Slam.
Go further back than that. When Ron Waldron was the coach of Neath and then became the coach of Wales, I think I'm right in thinking there were 13 Neath players in a Welsh team in
13
some
Neath
year.
players. I used to love watching Neath.
How times change, eh? Yeah. I played down in Neath.
Yeah,
frightening experience.
I played Neath Athletic once in a cup game against Colwyn Bay. I used to love watching Neath, because I used to come home from swimming as like a 10-year-old or something. You turn on Thunderbirds, and immediately after Thunderbirds was Scrum 5 Live, and Neath would just look.
Was it?
Yeah, Neath just looked like the
they were
coolest club.
They were a ferocious team, but as we know, you know, Neath's a tiny, tiny place.
I got no idea. I've never been. I mean, for me...
Oh, it's tiny. Like, just outside Swansea.
Yeah, like a 10-year-old Jonathan Beardmore living in Llandudno. Neath sounded like a massive place. And you watched it and they had a rugby team. And you're like, wow, that's incredible.
Neath. Just up from Port Talbot and down the road from Swansea. Yeah, it's not big. Yeah. It's not big.
Right.
Anyway.
We'll be reconvening next month. And enjoy your flight back to Fiji.
Thanks a lot, mate. Take care.
All right, take care, Mark. Bye-bye.
All right, cheers. Bye.
Hey, it's Mark Marin from WTF, here to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. And I'm sure the reason you're listening to this podcast right now is because you chose it. Well, choose Progressive's Name Your Price tool, and you could find insurance options that fit your budget, so you can pick the best one for your situation. Who doesn't like choice? Try it at Progressive.com. And now, some legal info. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Get ready for an unforgettable experience at the U.S. Border Collie Handlers Association's National Sheepdog Finals. From September 30th to October 6th, Belle Grove Plantation hosts the 2024 American Championship right here in our own backyard. Witness top handlers and their skilled dogs and a breathtaking display of teamwork and precision. Bring the whole family for fun, food, and spectacular entertainment. Tickets are selling fast. Get your tickets now, including discounts on 3-day and week-long passes. Visit bellegrove.org for your tickets today.
With the Wells Fargo Active Cash Credit Card, you can earn unlimited 2% cash rewards on purchases you want and purchases you need. That means you earn 2% cash rewards on what you want, like season tickets to watch your favorite team, and 2% cash rewards on what you need, like paying for parking. That's the beauty of the Active Cash Credit Card. It's ready when you are, with unlimited 2% cash rewards. The Wells Fargo Active Cash Credit Card. That's real life ready. Terms apply. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/activecash.